On June 23rd, the Supreme Court struck down New York's gun licensing law requiring citizens to demonstrate a special need for self-defense to carry a firearm. In 2014, New York residents Robert Nash and Brandon Koch applied for concealed carry licenses. Both had completed various training courses and had no criminal history. However, they were denied licenses for failing to show proper cause. Most states are shall-issue regimes, meaning that if you meet certain requirements, the state will grant you a gun license. However, under the proper cause standard, New York residents also had to demonstrate a special need for self-protection, distinguished from the general community, as held in Klonowski v. New York. This applied to concealed carry licenses, while open carry was generally banned. Bruen was the first major Second Amendment case to reach the Supreme Court in over a decade, and it built upon two cases in particular, District of Columbia v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago. Heller established that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. McDonald affirmed this decision and added that states, not just the federal government, must uphold that right. Still, this left open a big question. Citizens have the right to keep and bear arms, but to what extent? In other words, how much authority does the government have to regulate carry, particularly outside the home? Bruen sought to answer that question. The petitioners argued that the right to keep and bear should, as a rule, be available to the general public. New York maintained its interest in public safety and precedent justified its proper cause standard. In a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court held that New York's proper cause requirement violated the 14th Amendment by preventing law-abiding citizens from exercising their Second Amendment right to self-defense outside the home. The court's majority opinion rejected a two-step framework used by lower courts to address Second Amendment challenges. Under this framework, courts first looked to history, then considered whether the regulation furthered a key government interest in what is referred to as means-end testing. The Supreme Court scrapped the second step in favor of an approach that considered the text and history of the amendment instead. Historical analysis, it maintained, would be more legitimate and administrable than a judge's empirical judgment about the costs and benefits of firearms. New York's law failed historical scrutiny, as the court found that historical regulations were less restrictive in scope. For example, while several pre-founding era laws did prohibit arms, they banned only those weapons that were dangerous and unusual. And while some states banned concealed carry following the founding, they did so, by and large, on the premise that open carry was widely available. In its conclusion, the court stressed that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right. Just like citizens don't prove a need for free speech or an impartial jury, in the same way, the court reasoned, they shouldn't have to prove a special need to carry arms for self-defense. A concurrence by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, joined by Chief Justice John Roberts, clarified that there are still various restrictions that states can impose. For instance, background checks, mental health checks, and fingerprint records would all be legitimate. Long-standing or well-entrenched restrictions like gun bans for felons and restrictions for schools and government buildings also still apply. The key thing, however, is that these requirements are objective. Meanwhile, Justice Amy Coney Barrett highlighted historical considerations that the court left unresolved. Justice Samuel Alito responded to criticisms raised by the dissent, which was authored by Justice Stephen Breyer and joined by Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. So what were these criticisms? For one, Breyer argued that there are serious pitfalls in an approach that relies almost exclusively on history. Citing statistics on gun violence, he averred that courts must consider the compelling interests that states have in maintaining public safety. Extensive historical surveys could also be cumbersome, requiring resources that lower courts don't have access to. Third, Breyer contended that the court should have considered the law's evidentiary record to fully understand how it operated in practice. Justice Alito, for his part, argued that the court's ruling is simple. The court held that New York's law is unconstitutional without speaking on who may own a firearm or the requirements a person must meet to own a gun. The justice also expressed skepticism that laws akin to New York's would deter violence. Instead, he claimed, violence heightens the needs of ordinary citizens to have the means for self-defense. Incidentally, Congress passed a bipartisan gun reform bill, the most significant in decades, the day after the court's ruling. The bill strengthened background checks, narrowed access to firearms for young adults, and funded school safety programs, among others. Under Bruen, so long as these measures are objective, they should pass legal muster. I hope you enjoyed the summary of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. Thanks for watching.